Well, the government came under fire again today for the high cost of security for the G8 and G20 summits taking place next month in Ontario. Parliament's budget watchdog is considering an investigation into the estimated cost of nearly $1 billion for security, and the NDP and Liberals have asked the Auditor General to conduct an urgent review of the costs. Today, the matter was front and centre in the daily question period and later at scrums.
Mr. Speaker, there's a pattern of reckless spending here that needs to be recognized. This is a government that inherited a $13 billion surplus and turned it into deficit before the recession even began.
Exactly.
And now they're spending more than $1 billion of borrowed money on a summit because they couldn't even figure out where to hold it. Why are Canadian taxpayers footing the bill for this kind of incompetence?
The Honourable Minister of Transport. Order. Mr. Speaker, since 9/11, security has become a new reality for Canadians and for people in every part of the world, Mr. Speaker. I think all members of Parliament, particularly those of us from Ottawa, were deeply concerned with the recent firebombing not 3 miles from this chamber, Mr. Speaker. We're going to work with international authorities to ensure that international leaders like President Barack Obama, like the President of China, President Hu, and to make sure that the people of Huntsville, Muskoka, and most importantly, the people in the large city of Toronto are safe. We will do what we can to preserve security and to keep this summit safe, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Chef de l'Opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The handling of this issue is comical. They couldn't figure out a location. They couldn't nail down an agenda. They couldn't figure out who to invite. You wouldn't organize a children's party this way. And now we're on the hook for $1 billion security charge on top of a $54 billion deficit. Canadian families who do balance their budgets wonder why this incompetence has been allowed to happen.
Honourable Minister of Transport. The leader of the Liberal Party never misses an occasion to run down Canada. Here we have great leadership from the Prime Minister, inviting leaders from around the world to come to Canada to talk about what we can do to help boost the worldwide economy, to help what we can do to help poor mothers and children in the third world. We're inviting world leaders from some of the most important countries, Mr. Speaker, to come to Canada. And, Mr. Speaker, since 9/11, security is a new reality, and we will not be intimidated by thugs and terrorists who would want to come to Canada and cause us harm. We're going to make sure that people are safe, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Ajax Pickering. Order.
Questioning this government's management, not Canada. At 2,000% more expensive than the last G20 and 300% more expensive than any summit ever held. The government is spending more than $1 billion taxpayer dollars on the most expensive 72 hours of meetings in history. Dropped in a cabinet minister's riding that couldn't handle it, the government's mismanagement has now forced the meetings into 2 locations, one in the nation's largest city and a security nightmare. Having run up the biggest deficit in Canadian history, how can the government look in the eyes of the unemployed and justify this $1 billion binge?
Right. The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians were shocked last week over the firebombing at the Royal Bank in Ottawa. This is a prime example why we need to be prepared to face thugs and terrorists who threaten our safety. And I notice that the Liberals on the other side are laughing. That is their attitude towards security. They're not concerned about security. I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, we are concerned about security. We are on track to host a safe and secure G8 and G20 summits, 2 separate summits, back to back, unprecedented. The cost is expensive, but the security is worth it.
Boondoggle at HRDC, as it was called at the time under Jane Stewart. Now the Conservatives have their own $1 billion boondoggle at the G20 summit. You know, the government is now spending 6 times more than they specified in the general estimates that were presented in this House. Previous G20 summits cost a mere fraction, and they kept everybody safe. 18 million in Pittsburgh, 30 million in London. How can this government and these Conservatives justify spending 30 times more than London did just a year ago to talk about
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Canada is providing major leadership on the world stage. We're doing something that's unprecedented, hosting both the G8 and the G20. Leaders from around the world, from the most important countries, will be coming together to talk about what we can do to boost the global economy and create jobs around the world. We're also working on our prenatal and our initiative to help African women, Mr. Speaker. The reality is, since 9/11, there is an unprecedented need to ensure that the leaders are safe and secure, that the meetings can take place, and that we can also ensure the safety for the people in both Muskoka and in the great city of Toronto. I think the member for Toronto Danforth should be proud that world leaders are going to be visiting Toronto and showing off a great city.
You look at a city like London that just 12 months ago, roughly, put on a G20 summit. This is a city that has experienced terrorist attacks, including on their subways. They provided a secure G20 for $30 million of security costs. This government is going to spend 30 times more than that. I mean, something's wrong with this picture.